What's going on, guys? I'm Mario, and today I'm going to be going over the desk I built in my office that acts as a gaming setup and a shipping station. The main objective here was to tidy up this side of the wall with this fold-out table, and to incorporate all the same equipment neatly into a new desk. So let's jump into how I did that. I started with cutting down some 3/4 inch MDF, and that was going to make up the bottom portion of the desk. The easiest way for me to cut this is with my track saw hooked up to my shop vac, that I should probably get a longer hose for. I did this same step over and over until I got all my pieces cut out while listening to this new playlist me and my sister made, which is nothing but 2000s pop music. Next was to start nailing and gluing all of the pieces together. I'm adding shelving on the bottom left side of the desk, but I wasn't quite sure what I was putting there yet. So I used this shelf pin jig, that way I'd be able to adjust the shelves to whatever height that I needed. On the bottom right side, I made this pull-out shelf that was going to hold the printer. I also added this 2x4 to the bottom of the shelf, that way it doesn't sag over time. Next was to drill out holes for the adjustable feet, that way I could level out the desk. Once everything was together, it was time to start painting. However, this time I decided to try putting drywall spackle on the edges of the MDF to seal it. That way it has a smoother finish. Between sanding the spackle and using sealing primer, it had smoothed out all the edges great and was now ready for the first coat of paint. I used the same black paint that I had for the walls downstairs, but it had more of a grayer tint to it than I wanted for the desk. So I ended up mixing it with some matte black I used for my bedroom. And that gave me the color I was looking for. While I waited for the paint to dry, I started cleaning out space on the office wall so I could get ready for the new desk. I first hung the monitors to get my height right, and then went off of that number with my laser level to get the line all the way across the wall. Next was to make a bunch of holes in the wall, label all the wires, and then fish them from hole to hole, that way everything is hidden. To support the tabletop, I'm building this 2x4 frame that runs the length of the desk. Once in place, I made sure to screw into every stud that I could. That way, I had as much stability and strength as possible. I then painfully brought up all the painted pieces up the stairs, screwed them in place, and painted any spot on the 2x4 frame that was going to be visible. The printer fit perfectly and pulled out great on the shelf. However, there wasn't enough space to use the paper shredder even though it fit underneath of it. But tilting it out like this gave me an idea. I traced the bottom of the shredder onto a piece of cardboard, took the measurements, then jumped into Fusion 360. I 3D modeled this holder to fit the shredder and pivot off of a set of hinges. That way I could tilt it out from under my printer and use the shredder properly. Then I sent the model to my printer and installed it in my desk. Now it was time for the most important part, the tabletop. I had acquired a bunch of walnut wood in a trade for my alien escape room project and thought it would have been perfect for this. However, this wood was in pretty rough shape and I don't have much experience joining boards together, especially at the length of this tabletop. Luckily, my buddy Brian replied to my story telling me to bring all the wood to his shop in Ohio. The timing of this worked out great because we were already doing a maker get together over the weekend and it was only a few days away. So instead of me taking a crack at it, I loaded all the walnut in my truck and drove it to Brian's shop in Ohio. Brian planed all the boards down to a rough equal dimension, then put each board through the joiner several times to straighten out all the edges. I also got to give the joiner a try, but I did like half of a board and Brian basically did all the others. We did a quick check to make sure all the walnut was going to fit together nicely, and then I used the biscuit joiner to cut slots into all the boards. Next was to load in all the biscuits and glue them together. Once all the glue was dry, Brian used his planer to even up the bottom of the table. We then had the 5 of us shuffling the tabletop through this behemoth of a drum sander. Me and Brian would push it through, and the guys on the other side would catch it and bring it back to the front. And with that, it was time to take my nice sanded tabletop back to New Jersey. A big thank you to Brian for all the help and letting me use the shop, as well as hosting this year's get together. Also, thank you to the rest of the guys who were there, especially Andrew, Jamie, and Scott, who were the ones helping push it through the drum sander. It's always a blast getting together with you guys. So even though the main part of the tabletop was now done, I still had more pieces and shelves to put together. To do that, I ran the rest of the walnut through my planer until they were about 5/8 thick. Since I didn't have a joiner, I used my track saw, that way I could cut as straight a line as possible. Then I glued them up the same way I learned at Brian's. Once glued, I started cutting out the pieces for the shelf. After that, I started cutting the main tabletop to its final dimensions. Then I brought everything upstairs to make sure it fit properly before I did my final sanding. I'm having this left side fold down, that way I get the length of the desk I wanted, but mainly so I don't block my closet door. Since everything test fit correctly, I moved on to adding some inlays into the top of the desk. I chose 3 symbols from 3 of my favorite games: Doom, Gears of War, and Halo. I used red oak wood for the Doom and Gears of War logo, but for the Halo symbol you'll see a little bit later, I used some leftover maple. I thought the best idea would be to stain them ahead of time, but this ended up being a waste of time since I had to sand them flush with the tabletop later on. Once I got the reverse shape cut into the tabletop, it was time to put glue in the hole and then hammer in the inlay. If you're wondering how I cut this all out, it's from using a Shaper Origin that uses this domino tape that's all over the tabletop. It's like a router CNC combo that I've used in several other videos. When it came to the Halo legendary symbol, I accidentally cut out a spot I wasn't supposed to. So I traced this shape on a piece of painter's tape, transferred it onto a small piece of walnut, and then cut and filed it into shape. Of course, it's still not perfect, but it's a lot better than what it was. For any other small gaps, I used the old sawdust and glue trick to make this putty and spread it around. However, I was not so lucky with the Gears of War symbol. I ended up having pieces break off around the mouth, so I filled it with wood shavings, CA glued them in place, and then puttied over top of that. Once everything was sanded flat and restained, I put my first coat of shellac on, which really brought out the cool look of the walnut. I wish I would have used a sprayer for this instead of a foam brush to get a more consistent finish on the tabletop, but I think it still turned out fine. In total, each piece got 4 coats of shellac and sanded with 500 grit sandpaper in between each coat. So the process went shellac, sand, shot back, taff cloth, then repeat. I have also been saving all these Faygo cans for a future project. Leave a comment below if you have a guess on what that project might be. Once all 4 coats were done, I used some steel wool to scratch up the surface and apply some wax. Lastly, I took a lint-free cloth and rubbed everything in. Then it was finally time to put on the tabletop and complete the build. Now I have a much cleaner space to play video games, watch movies, and a spot to pack up projects to send them out. I really love how the shelves came out and how they hide all the wires. It makes it much easier whenever a friend comes over to just plop their Xbox down on the shelf and plug in all the cables. As far as the shipping and packaging aspect, my closet holds all the boxes and bubble wrap, and I use this desk to pack, tape, and print the shipping labels. This is very useful for anything that gets ordered off my website, and if you're interested on getting something custom made, check it out and send a new project idea. I tried way too long to think of a clever way to segue into my website there, and that wasn't even that good.
It feels like somebody wants to sell me something!
There is another use I found for this desk, which is to store a bunch of ongoing project stuff, so it may not be super clean all the time, but we all know what Mr. Strawberry would say.
Mr. Strawberry says, fuck off.
Well, that about wraps up this one. Yet again, a big thank you to Brian for all the help and letting me use his shop. This tabletop would not have been the same without all his help. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.